Shadows twist where whispers grow. The edge of light begins to flow. A world unseen through fractured glass, where futures meet the echoes past. Step closer now, the veil is thin. A riddle starts where dreams begin. The experimental medium calls your name. Nothing here will be the same.
Welcome to the Experimental Medium podcast. You're joining us today as we really immerse ourselves in some truly fascinating historical records, these documented sittings with Mrs. Piper, a medium who gained, well, considerable renown back in the day.
Yes, and we know you, our listeners, appreciate a good exploration of the unusual, the unexplained, perhaps.
Exactly. So we've curated some of the most, let's say, remarkable events from these sessions. We're going to dig into what was actually observed and recorded.
And what's immediately striking when you delve into these records is the sheer range of phenomena, psychic phenomena that were reportedly observed.
Right. So many different types.
We're going to take a closer look at some of the different ways these manifestations occurred, highlighting the instances that really make you pause and think about what was being witnessed, and meticulously written down too.
Okay, so where do we begin to unpack all this? Let's start with the idea of controls. You see this term pop up a lot. Essentially, these were believed to be spirit entities acting as guides, almost like spiritual intermediaries for the main spirits trying to communicate through Mrs. Piper.
That's right. And one of the early, quite prominent figures was Finuit. He seemed to be a key presence in those initial stages.
But it wasn't just him, right? As you go through the records, you see the development of other communicators.
Yes, exactly. And a particularly interesting one is Hiram Hart. Over time, it's noted that Hiram Hart became, well, increasingly skilled at communicating.
Skilled how?
Gaining almost as much control over Mrs. Piper's mediumship, her ability to connect, as Finuit eventually did. It was a gradual development.
And here's a detail that really, makes you wonder. The records mention one specific person, a sitter, for whom Hiram Hart was the primary communicator for a full decade.
A decade. Think about that. 10 years of consistent connection with this one spirit guide.
It really suggests a sustained relationship, maybe quite deep.
It does. That kind of long-term connection, it highlights the potential for these control personalities to establish what looks like a stable, enduring link.
With individuals trying to make contact.
Precisely. This extended relationship with Hiram Hart for that one sitter, it's a compelling example of the nature of these purported guides and the consistency they could maintain.
Okay, so beyond these guiding spirits, how did the messages themselves actually reach the sitters? It wasn't always the same method, was it?
No, not at all. The records mention something called direct voice.
Direct voice, like the spirit speaking directly.
That's the idea, where it sounded as though the spirits were speaking independently as Mrs. Piper. While maybe not as common as other forms reported in these sittings, these instances are certainly noteworthy.
So those present would hear voices that seemed distinct from hers.
That's what the accounts suggest, yes. Attributed to the spirits trying to communicate. It adds another layer, to the variety of phenomena observed.
But it seems the most frequent way messages came through was automatic writing.
Yes. Automatic writing. That appears again and again in the records. It seems to be the primary means.
And the description suggests that while she was in a trance, her hand would just move and write.
Right. And she herself would be completely unaware of the content being transcribed. Observers consistently noted she seemed unconscious while writing.
Like her hand was being guided by something else.
Exactly. And upon waking, she'd have no memory of what had been written. That lack of conscious control is really a defining characteristic of automatic writing as a mediumistic phenomenon.
Okay, shifting gears a bit. The records also touch on instances where spirits were seemingly seen or recognized.
Yes, visually perceived in some way.
There are accounts of Mrs. Piper as she was coming out of a trance, having what they called significant mutterings.
Those transition moments.
And during these, she would sometimes describe seeing white people in the spirit world. What do you make of those fleeting visions?
Those mutterings as she transitioned back, they are quite intriguing, aren't they? The description of white people as spirits is a curious detail.
And she apparently called those returning black.
The records note that yes, it's possible this reflects maybe an altered state of perception, or perhaps symbolic imagery experienced during that liminal phase between consciousness and trance. Hard to say for sure.
And it wasn't just Mrs. Piper having these visual experiences, apparently. There's a particularly striking case.
Oh, the one with this sitter.
Yes, where a sitter claimed to have actually seen a spirit's hand physically guiding Mrs. Piper's hand during automatic writing.
Can you imagine witnessing that firsthand? That would undoubtedly be a profoundly impactful experience.
Definitely.
The sitter's perception of a spirit hand directly interacting with the medium in such a tangible way, it adds another fascinating dimension, suggesting maybe a more direct, even physical manifestation of spiritual influence.
There's also that account of a general, and we'll probably talk more about him later, but during a sitting, he inquired about a little Augustus being present and visible.
Right. That's a key point. This inquiry gives you a glimpse into the perspective of the spirits communicating.
They expected to be seen.
They seem to assume a level of potential visibility, yes, suggesting that in their reality, or maybe under specific energetic conditions facilitated by the medium, their presence might be perceptible. Raises questions about spiritual visibility.
Now let's move on to some particularly compelling instances, those involving spirits who had passed away quite recently.
Ah, yes, the rapid return cases.
The case of General Martin is one that stands out. He reportedly communicated clearly, quite strongly, just 21 months after his death.
Which, in the context of these records, is presented as relatively short. His ability to communicate in such a clear, robust manner less than 2 years after passing. It's noted as quite remarkable.
Suggests a strong connection, maybe.
A strong and persistent connection, seemingly not diminished much by the recent transition.
Even more extraordinary, maybe, is the case of the nephew Harold.
Oh, Harold's case is astonishing.
He purportedly communicated just 5 days after his accidental death.
5 days, and he was able to relay specific messages too.
That's an incredibly short time frame for someone to seemingly establish contact after dying.
The immediacy is truly remarkable. To be able to return with coherent messages so soon after a sudden, likely traumatic event, it certainly makes this a standout case.
And those messages about wanting to see Annie, about his belongings, they feel very personal.
Very poignant, yes. They carry a strong sense of authenticity.
And it wasn't just a brief, fleeting connection, was it?
No, the records indicate Harold communicated more clearly in subsequent sittings.
And even mentioned the initial difficulty.
Yes, he apparently made reference to the initial difficulty he experienced in coming over, which suggests a process, maybe an adjustment period, or a learning curve for spirits trying to establish communication.
That acknowledgement of the initial challenges really lends a sense of, plausibility to the account, doesn't it?
It does. It implies that even in the spirit realm, there might be adaptation needed for effective interaction with the living.
Okay, let's turn our attention now to how these seances were seemingly managed or controlled.
Right, the structure behind the scenes, so to speak.
The records mention Rector and Imperator as guiding intelligences. They appear to have had a pretty significant role.
Overseeing what was referred to as the light.
Which we understand essentially refers to Mrs. Piper's mediumistic abilities, right? Her capacity to connect.
Exactly. Rector and Imperator seem to have functioned as overseers, maybe facilitators of the whole communication process. The term light suggests they viewed her ability as a kind of energetic conduit.
A necessary condition for spirits to interact.
Precisely.
It's interesting, too, that Rector often made an appearance at the beginning and the end of the sittings.
Yes, and frequently offered spiritual advice. This implies a role beyond just managing who was speaking.
Like a guiding, almost pastoral element.
It does suggest that. A concern not just for successful message transmission, but also maybe for the overall well-being and spiritual understanding of the sitters.
The concept of an ethereal cord connecting the spirit to the medium is also mentioned. What's the significance of that?
The ethereal cord. It's a concept you find in various spiritualist texts, often described as a kind of energetic link or tether between the communicator and the physical medium.
Like the pathway for the connection?
Possibly. In this context, it likely represented the presumed mechanism for energy or consciousness transfer, allowing the spirit to influence the medium.
And it seems the communicators themselves were reliant on this light being burning or open to communicate effectively.
That really emphasizes how crucial Mrs. Piper's state was for the whole process.
Definitely.
The analogy underscores the apparent dependence of the spirits on her specific energetic or psychic state. Her focus ability was a prerequisite for them to interact.
There are also instances where rector or imperator seemingly intervened, didn't they? Managed the communication flow.
Yes, sometimes allowing direct communication, other times acting as an intermediary.
So they had a certain level of authority over who could speak and how.
It certainly looks that way. These interventions suggest a structured system, or maybe protocols, within the spirit realm, at least as perceived through these sittings.
Regulating the flow, deciding when direct interaction was okay, when mediation was needed, maybe to manage the energy involved.
That seems plausible. They operated with a degree of authority.
The records even mention conditions sometimes needing to be arranged for specific spirits to communicate.
Right, which further emphasizes that spirit communication, according to these accounts, wasn't always simple or automatic.
It required specific circumstances, maybe preparations or alignments.
Exactly. Not just a random event, but a process needing the right conditions on both sides.
Now let's touch on some of the notable individuals involved, either present at the sittings or mentioned in communications. Richard Hodgson is key here.
Hodgson, yes, a fascinating figure. He started as an investigator of Mrs. Piper.
A skeptical one initially?
Yes, quite critical. But later, after his own passing, he became a purported communicator himself through her. Quite a transition.
From investigator to communicator.
And it's noted that in his early post-mortem communications, his personality seemed to blend somewhat with others. An interesting detail about those potential initial stages of spirit return.
We also hear repeatedly about a general, described as a former associate of one sitter.
Yes, the general provided very specific personal recollections, even quoted shared poetry.
Which strongly suggests a continuity of memory and personality, doesn't it? At least from the sitter's perspective.
Absolutely. The ability to recall intricate personal details, specific shared experiences, it's presented as significant evidence for the persistence of individual identity beyond physical life. Those personal touches resonate.
William James, the psychologist, is also mentioned.
Right, in the context of his prior conversations and interest in psychical research.
His involvement, even indirectly, adds a certain intellectual weight, doesn't it?
It does. James's well-known interest and engagement with the field lend credibility to the serious inquiries undertaken regarding Mrs. Piper. His approach was cautious, but open to exploring phenomena outside conventional understanding.
And of course, family members of the sitters, they frequently appeared, it seems.
Purportedly communicating messages filled with love, reassurance, parents, siblings, children.
Those must have been incredibly emotional moments for the people there.
Undeniably. The recurring theme of communication from deceased family underscores the deep personal significance of these sittings. Messages centered on love, well-being, continued bonds, providing immense comfort.
There's a particularly poignant case involving a sitter referred to as MB.
Ah, yes, the delayed communication about her passing.
Even though Mrs. Piper apparently had no conscious knowledge of her death, that seems significant.
It really does. The fact that information about MB's passing came through, apparently without Mrs. Piper knowing beforehand, that points towards a potential source of information external to her own mind.
These are the kinds of cases often cited as suggestive of genuine psychic phenomena, aren't they?
They are indeed particularly compelling.
We also see brief mentions of other communicators, names like Hiram Hart, Laura, Allinson Pickett, Mrs. Spencer.
Right, indicating a wider network. It wasn't just a few consistent presences.
Suggests a diverse range of spirit entities who were seemingly able and willing to interact through her mediumship, each maybe with their own connection to the sitters.
That seems likely.
And then there's the somewhat unusual instance of Stanley.
The deceased first husband of a sitter's sister?
That's the one. He apparently offered clear communication and even distinguished himself from a later husband.
Again, reinforcing this idea of a persistent individual identity, relational awareness beyond death. Another compelling example from the records.
And finally, just a fleeting mention of HYPLOP, likely James Hyslop, the researcher.
Yes, expressing a desire to communicate.
Even that brief note is intriguing, hints at the continued interest of those who studied these phenomena in potentially participating from the other side.
It certainly raises that fascinating possibility, doesn't it? That those who actively studied this in life might continue their inquiries, perhaps from a different perspective, after passing.
So, as we start to bring together these incredible accounts, what are some of the key insights, the truly extraordinary aspects that stand out for you from these records? What should we really take away?
Well, several truly remarkable elements emerge, I think. First and foremost, the apparent persistence of individual personality and memory. That's striking.
The details, the characteristic ways of speaking.
Exactly. The specific details, the characteristic language, recalling shared experiences. It strongly suggests some form of individual identity might endure, which really challenges purely materialistic views of consciousness.
Absolutely. And the fact that these spirits could often provide information that Mrs. Piper herself had no way of knowing, that's huge.
That's profoundly significant, yes. It points to a potential source of knowledge beyond her normal sensory channels.
That ability to access and convey verifiably unknown information, it's crucial, isn't it?
It is. Those instances where the information was later confirmed as accurate strengthen the argument for an external source of communication, something beyond the medium's own subconscious.
And we can't overlook the sheer emotional weight, the deeply personal nature of so many messages.
No. The expressions of love, the concern for those still living, the specific references to shared moments, they resonate with a sense of authenticity. It's hard to just dismiss the human element.
Emotional resonance, it must have lent a powerful sense of reality for the sitters, highlighting that deep human desire for connection.
And the comfort these communications could provide, yes.
We also get these recurring glimpses into the immediate post-mortem experience as described by some communicators.
Right. Feelings of initial confusion, then gradual clarity, reunions with loved ones.
Seeing those consistent themes across different communicators is quite thought-provoking.
It is. The fact you see these recurring descriptions, the disorientation giving way to clarity, meeting loved ones, suggests a potential consistency in these subjective accounts, a noteworthy pattern.
The recurring theme of spiritual growth, gaining deeper understanding, also seems significant.
Yes, many communicators express a sense of newfound clarity, a broader perspective, suggests a continued evolution of consciousness.
Which aligns with many philosophical and spiritual traditions, doesn't it? The continued journey of the soul.
It does indeed.
And then there are those instances where future events were seemingly predicted, like the mention of the sitter and the light being in Europe.
Those add another layer of intrigue, definitely, while difficult to verify definitively sometimes.
They raise fascinating questions about potential foresight, maybe a different perception of time.
It's possible. Requires caution in interpretation, but it's there in the records.
The explanation of different spheres or levels within the spirit world also comes up.
Suggesting a structured view of the afterlife, yes. Varying states of being. Like a complex, multi-layered reality, potentially corresponding to levels of development or consciousness.
Finally, the records consistently highlight the challenges, the limitations inherent in communicating through a medium.
Right, it wasn't always perfect or completely clear. Messages sometimes fragmented, difficult to interpret.
Which adds a sense of realism, perhaps.
I think so. The acknowledged difficulties and imperfections underscore the complexities involved, bridging that gap between realms. It wasn't presented as flawless.
What incredible insights into the unknown. These records from the Experimental Medium podcast certainly give you, our listener, a lot to consider about consciousness, what might lie beyond this life, the possibility of communication.
Indeed. The detailed accounts we've explored, they raise profound questions about our understanding of reality, the potential for connections that transcend the physical.
Those aha moments within these narratives can certainly prompt a reevaluation of what we consider possible.
Definitely food for thought.
Well, thank you for joining us on this fascinating exploration today. We invite you to consider what aspect of these extraordinary sittings resonates most with you, and what further questions do these historical accounts ignite in your own mind?
Perhaps your own deep dive into these mysteries is just beginning.
Shadows twist where whispers grow. The edge of light begins to flow. A world unseen through fractures.